Around 480 AD, the administrative machinery of the Western Roman Empire collapsed. Centuries of centralized power fractured, leaving a massive vacuum across the Italian peninsula. Filling that void were new, decentralized states. In Italy, this meant the rise of the Ostrogothic kingdom, led by the foreign conqueror Theodoric the Great. Born directly into this chaos was Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius. He belonged to the illustrious Anici family, a lineage of emperors and consuls representing the final generation of the traditional Roman aristocracy. Boethius's lineage and timeline positioned him as a link between a dead empire and an emerging medieval kingdom. He possessed the learned authority of the Roman past, living inside a new state that desperately needed his expertise. The Ostrogoths held absolute military dominance over Italy, but they faced a severe governing deficit. They lacked the civic and scientific knowledge required to administer a complex Roman-style state. To run the country, Theodoric relied heavily on the surviving Roman elite. Boethius and his peers stepped in to provide the critical intellectual infrastructure for the Gothic administration. For Boethius, serving a foreign king was a matter of civic duty. Drawing directly from Plato's Republic, he argued that philosophers have a moral obligation to participate in governance, rather than withdrawing into pure academia. He operated as a Roman technocrat, proving that classical philosophical ideals could be used to legitimize and run the daily operations of a Gothic-ruled Mediterranean order. His political ascent was rapid. He cemented his status by marrying into the powerful Samaci family, and by the year 510 AD, he had secured the position of consul. 12 years later, he reached the peak of his influence as Magister Officiorum, the head of all civil government services. He managed everything from internal domestic policy to delicate diplomatic relations. That same year, King Theodoric granted Boethius a unique honor, the joint consulship of his two sons. This signaled his family's total integration into the highest echelon of the new Mediterranean order. But this political influence rested on an unstable foundation. The court was deeply divided by religious and ethnic friction between the native Catholic Romans and the Arian Christian Ostrogoths. The very competence and influence that allowed him to govern also generated the envy of his rivals. This success bred the suspicions that would eventually lead to his ruin. While running the civil service, Boethius pursued a parallel mission. He called it his logical project, an ambitious plan to translate the entire surviving corpus of Plato and Aristotle into Latin. He was racing against a cultural collapse. The Western world was rapidly losing its grasp of the Greek language. If nobody could read Greek, centuries of ancient mathematical and philosophical wisdom would be permanently locked away. Without these specific translations, the tools of rigorous analytical thought would have vanished from Western Europe entirely. He was filtering the complex terminology of antiquity into an accessible Latin framework. He didn't finish the entire project, but the portions he did complete formed what became known as the Logica Vetus, or Old Logic. He successfully provided the formal rules of reasoning for a completely new audience. While his political career managed the present, his Logica Vetus provided the standardized methodology for Western European thought that would persist for the next 5 centuries. His political career came to a sudden downfall in 524 AD. Accused of treason, Boethius was imprisoned, tortured, and eventually bludgeoned to death on the specific orders of King Theodoric. Yet his physical execution did not silence his work. By killing the man, the Gothic court inadvertently ensured the survival of the translation project he left behind. His logic texts became so pervasive across Europe that historians later coined the term Aetas Boetiana, the Boethian Age, to describe his absolute intellectual dominance through the 12th century. Theodoric's attempt to destroy a political rival left the philosopher's translation project intact. This ensured that Boethius's logical framework would outlast the Gothic kingdom by a millennium. The scale of his textual survival is clear in the record. Over 400 manuscript copies of the Consolation of Philosophy reached the modern era. This diagram is a medieval arbor or tree diagram. Scribes used these as pedagogical tools to help students visualize the mathematical interrelations of the quadrivium, the 4 arts of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. This page of Middle English calligraphy shows how his influence reached the vernacular. King Alfred adapted his work in the 9th century, and Geoffrey Chaucer produced a Middle English translation called the Boethius in the 14th. That impact extends into the 21st century. Researchers recently reconstructed the lost songs of consolation, reviving 11th century musical settings of Boethius's poetry that had been silent for 1,000 years. By preserving the specific terminology of Greek antiquity, Boethius provided the necessary vocabulary for the medieval schools that followed him. He carried the language of reason across the collapse of one world, helping to find the next.